Welcome, everyone. My name is Tani Schwartz-Herman. I'm a program director at JTS. Pleased to welcome you to our session today with Rabbi Eliezer Diamond, Rabbi Judah Nadich, Associate Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics.
Professor, sorry, Tani, Professor.
Oh, sorry. That. Rabbi Judah Nadich, Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS. Our session is entitled Cultivating a Habit of Generosity. This session is part of Limud's Global Day of Jewish Learning. And today, more than 10,000 Jewish learners in 16 countries across 4 continents will take part in this incredible event. Gathering and learning together is a pillar of Jewish tradition, and this year we lean on tradition more than ever as we face unspeakable challenges in Israel and around the world. Limud works to animate Jewish community through the belief that everyone is both a learner and a teacher, and we thank you for your participation. Before we begin our session, and before I go ahead and introduce Rabbi Diamond more fully, I just wanted to make also one quick announcement regarding another opportunity to learn with JTS this fall. We have currently happening right now our fall webinar series, which takes place every Monday through December 11th. And Rabbi Diamond will be teaching as part of this series in a few weeks. Our theme is 2 are better than 1, friendship in Jewish text, thought, and life. Every week we feature an outstanding JTS scholar. I'm going to post a link in the chat where you can learn more and register. Sorry, just give me 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and post this. Okay, and just to go over the format for our session, Rabbi Diamond will pause for questions during the session. And also, again, at the end, you can use the chat feature to submit your questions to me, and I will select a few to present to Rabbi Diamond. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Rabbi Diamond. Rabbi Judah, as I said before, Rabbi Judah Nadich, Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS. He teaches courses in rabbinic literature and Talmud studies. Rabbi Diamond has written on prayer, asceticism, and issues of environmental law and ethics. He has taught in a variety of settings, including Stern College, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, the 92nd Street Y, as well as several Ramah camps. We're so pleased to have him teaching us today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rabbi Diamond.
Okay, thank you very much, Tani, and good afternoon, barely, to everyone. So I'm glad that you're here, and we're going to be addressing one of my favorite topics. In general, I have, throughout my life, been very engaged by the project of religious character formation. And one of the sources for engaging in that activity is the literature of the Musar movement. It's a very varied literature, but it was inspired in part by a dissatisfaction with the traditional forms of Jewish life, in the sense that the feeling was that Jewish life, the totality of Jewish life for some was the performance of the mitzvot and Torah study. And the sense of the Musar masters was that, since presumably the goal of all of these is to produce a certain kind of personality, which in turn would lead to certain kinds of behavior that weren't necessarily codified in a book somewhere, that the system or the discipline of Judaism or Jewish life that they encountered, they felt was not achieving that. And so they felt that there was need for a new system, a supplementary system, which consists essentially, first of all, of self-examination. And also the Balei Musar understood something that we have come to understand, especially through Freud, that you can know or believe that a certain course of action is the right course of action, but we are complex being. We have a subconscious, we have the irrational. And so to truly commit ourselves to the right and the good, we have to look at the more hidden aspects of who we are and find ways of addressing those more hidden and irrational parts of ourselves in a way that we can transcend them and become godly people. And so today we're going to deal with a particular Musar master and a particular topic. Let's start with the Musar master. The Musar master, excuse me, is Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, who was born in, I remember his exact year, I did not write that down, but I think in the early 1900s. Let's see, he lived to, yeah, I believe that's right. And he was born in Gomel, which is in present-day Belarus. Then it was part of the Russian Empire. His father was a disciple of Rav Simcha Zissel of Kelm, one of the great Musar masters, who was known as the Alter of Kelm, the elder of Kelm. Dessler himself studied in the Kelm yeshiva, and he studied under the tutelage of Tzvi Hirsch Broid, who was the son-in-law of Rav Simcha Zissel of Kelm. So he studied in that yeshiva for many years. 1928, his father had to go to London for medical procedures. Dessler accompanied his father, and he ended up staying in England for many years. He was a congregational rabbi, and at some point he was asked to head a kollel, a new kollel, that was formed in Gateshead. And the point is that this was a new trend, a new stream in British Jewry. Till that point, British Jewry had been, that's what we would call now centrist Orthodox. It was a liberal movement also, but centrist Orthodox. And Gateshead was more of a Haredi stream. So he ran that. And in the 1940s, he was invited to become the Mashgiach Ruchani, his spiritual mentor or guide at the Panovich Yeshiva in Israel. And he took on that position, and he died there in Israel. In England, one of his disciples was Rabbi Aryeh Carmel, and Rabbi Carmel was instrumental in collecting both oral traditions and the writings of Rabbi Dessler and publishing them. They were not published in his lifetime. And this was published in it's published in various recensions. The most recent one is a 5-volume work. Rabbi Carmel also took selections from Michtav Me'Eliyahu, translated them into English, and published them in a 3-volume work called Strive for Truth. And the sources that we're going to be reading come from that 3-volume work. And in particular, these excerpts come from a extended essay of Rabbi Dessler's, which is called in Hebrew Kuntrus HaChesed. So an essay on chesed is a notoriously difficult word to translate. Let's translate it as generosity. An essay on generosity. And really, the best word we can use here, as we will see, is giving. It's an essay on the importance of giving. So let's begin looking at the sources. And Tani, if you would put them up for us. Okay. So let me say, even before we begin, if you look at the third line of this first source, right, so part one, Rabbi Dessler talks about, he establishes 2 personality types. One he calls the giver, and one he calls the taker. And the giver, he says, is really inspired by God, who, as he says in the third line, is the giver par excellence. All right, let's read through some of this, and then I'll offer some commentary. So he says here, when the Almighty created human beings, He made them capable of both giving and taking. The faculty of giving is a sublime power. It is one of the attributes of the blessed creator of all things. God is the giver par excellence. God's mercy, bounty, and goodness extend to all his creatures. His giving is pure giving, for God takes nothing in return. He can take nothing, for he lacks nothing, as the verse says. If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Now, I think, although Rabbi Dessler doesn't make this explicit here, he is regarding giving as a divine characteristic, but also that giving is a creative urge. We create the kind of world in which we live through giving. And we can say, I mean, why God created the world itself is a mystery, but in creating, God was also giving. So God's creation and God's giving are identical, synonymous perhaps. And so he says, we really can't give anything back to God, except what we can give back to God is, as he says in the third line, a means of expressing gratitude to him. This is an idea that he expresses elsewhere as well. Because as we'll see, he says the purpose in our life, our goal, our mission in life is to be givers. And how do we give when we are receivers? How are we givers in that moment? His answer to that is by offering gratitude. That is the kind of giving that we can offer when we receive from others. And also, he says this elsewhere, he doesn't say this here, that because God is a giver, one of the other ways in which we can give to God is to give to others. That is also a way that we fulfill our gratitude or obligation to God for giving to us. Okay? So in short, what we're saying here is God is the ultimate giver. God intends us to be givers as well. And that takes two forms. One, to be givers to others. And two, when we receive and we can't give back in kind, which is always true when God gives to us, but not only in that case, we give back through gratitude. I mean, in the human realm, think about one's parents. You think about everything that our parents provided to us. Is there any way, I would say, I don't know of any way of giving back to one's parents in proportion to what one has received. So one of the important ways in which one gives back is gratitude. That's part of the process of giving. Okay, let's move on to the next text. So here, Rabbi Dessler says there are essentially two personality types. Before he has described the giver, we've just talked about the giver. And maybe let's just say one more thing about the giver. This is actually something that Tolstoy talks about as well. That sometimes people think about giving as a zero-sum game. If I'm giving to others all the time, my tank is empty. I'm diminishing myself. And what Rabbi Dessler argues is that actually we become most fully ourselves through the process of giving. So we enlarge ourselves. We do not diminish ourselves through giving. But now there's another kind of person. And that's what he talks about here, the taker. On the other side stands the habit of taking, by which a person aspires to draw to himself all that comes within his reach. This is what people call egotism or selfishness. It is the root of all evils in the world. Some people take without giving anything in return. They are robbers if they take by force, or thieves if they take by stealth, or swindlers if they are cunning enough to persuade others to give them their property of their own free will, right? So I don't have to take something by force to be a taker. There are a variety of ways in which I am a taker, as long as my goal is to take as much as I can and to give as little as I can. So I just want to say, apropos of the third category, I recently had an experience like this, and I'm sure everyone here can talk about experiences like this. So we had our driveway, our asphalt driveway, resurfaced. And I should have done more investigation. We hired someone, whatever. And at one point he said, we want to put the special coating on, and it's going to cost X amount of money. I said, that sounds high to me. He said, okay, we'll bring it down to X. And then I did what I should have done before, is I went online and I realized, hey, this is no bargain. Generally speaking, this costs about $300 less than what he's charging me. And when I said this to him, he said, well, it's too late. You agreed to the higher amount, so you're out of luck. So, okay, business is business, but I'm just saying the mentality here is, if I can convince you to pay more than you really should pay, that's it. That's my goal here, to make as much money as possible and not necessarily to be transparent with you. So this is taking. And let me add something here that he discusses that is not in this paragraph. He points out that there are people who seem to be givers, but are actually takers. So let's say that I contribute some large sum of money to some institution, let's say to a university, to start a new school of X, new school of, I don't know, political science. And I say, I'm giving this money on the condition that you put my name in big letters on the front of the building, and the building has to be built in exactly this way, and I make all kinds of conditions. So Rabbi Dessler would argue that this person is giving in order to take. This is not true giving. True giving would be allowing people to take the money and do what they presumably need and what is best for them. But instead, I want to be able to take. I want to have my name up there. I want to have control. And the way that I can accomplish that is by giving. So that's a giver who's really a taker. On the other hand, he says, takers, there are takers and the recipients. Actually, let's wait. He discusses that a little bit later on. So he says now, excuse me, these two powers, giving and taking, form the roots of all character traits and all actions. And note, there is no middle way. Every person is devoted at the deepest level of his personality to one or the other of the two sides. And in the innermost longing of the heart, there are no compromises. It is a basic law that there is no middle path in human interest. In every act, in every word, in every thought, one is always devoted either to loving kindness and giving or to grasping and taking. Now, I'm guessing that at least some of you react to this statement the way I reacted to it initially, which was, really? Isn't it more complicated? Don't we speak of mixed motives when we do something? When we do something, we say, well, part of it is altruistic, part of it is for other reasons. You know, the rabbinical school students give a senior sermon. That's part of their requirement. And usually a faculty member helps them prepare the senior sermon. And a student of mine just gave his senior sermon. And somebody said, so how much time did you spend helping this person prepare? And I said, actually quite a bit. And I said, there are two reasons for that. One is that's my responsibility. If I'm taking on the responsibility of helping this person give a good sermon, then I have to give the person my full attention and help this person deliver the best possible sermon. The other is that at the end of the sermon, he's going to say, I want to thank Rabbi Diamond for his help in putting together this sermon. Now, when people hear this, I don't want people to say, really? That's what Diamond was able to accomplish? That's the best he could get. So there were mixed motives, right? Part of it was altruistic and part of it was not so altruistic. But I think what the Balei Musar are driving at is that sometimes when we speak of the complexity of motives, we do that as a means of obfuscation, as a means of not looking into ourselves and understanding clearly why we are doing what we are doing. And what Rabbi Dessler is urging upon us is a search for clarity and honesty. So leaving aside the question of the complexity, complexity should not be used as an excuse for not looking into ourselves and understanding clearly and honestly what our motivations are. An example of this for me is the Aseret HaDibrot. Look at the Aseret HaDibrot. First of all, they are in the singular, so they are addressed clearly to each and every individual. The second thing that's true about the Aseret HaDibrot is that they are not qualified. They are absolute. Do not steal. Do not commit adultery. Do not murder. Do not bear false witness. Now, in real life, let's take murder, for example. I mean, this may not be true of every one of these, but murder actually, and we can argue this, but the Torah itself countenances capital punishment. So is it really the fact that this is an absolute commandment? Do not kill? Do we not allow killing sometimes? And I think the answer is, and Gerald Blitzstein suggested this in an article, is to say that even when we feel that killing is appropriate, we can never forget that essentially killing is forbidden. And so that knowledge, the knowledge of the essential evil of killing, has to shape our thinking and shape our behavior. And that's how I understand Rabbi Dessler here. Rabbi Dessler is saying that, yes, maybe we are complicated beings, but we have to dig down and say, essentially, what are our motivations? Maybe let's see. Want to go down? Okay, let's take this one more text, and then I'll take questions. So, Rabbi Dessler says, he was delivering this, he was teaching this, and as he was teaching this, one of his students came back with a question. The question was, since it is true that there can be no giving without someone receiving what is given, surely giving itself leads to evil. Surely the giver makes the recipient the taker. And if you're saying that taking is wrong, but you can't have a giver without a taker. So how do you imagine this world of everyone giving? It's literally impossible. And so you're always going to have a world where there are takers, which according to you is a problem. So it follows too that there can never be a perfected world. If all human beings were to become givers, who would there be to take from them? His answer: there is a great difference between a recipient and a taker, and similarly between a giver and one from whom things are taken. We would do well not to confuse these concepts. There is a type of person who takes and lets people take from him. This is the one possessed by the power of taking. His taking arises from self-love. He wants only to take and would much prefer not to give at all. If anything is taken from him, this is only because he is unable to prevent it. So going back to the asphalt guy, or anytime you're involved in a business transaction, right, some of the people that you're dealing with are going to say, my goal is to get as much as possible, and I'm only going to give you the minimum that I have to give you to make the transaction take place. In no sense do I take your interests into account. So this is the one possessed by the power of taking. His taking arises from self-love. He wants only to take and would much prefer not to give at all. If anything is taken from him, this is only because he is unable to prevent it. There is another person, one who gives and receives. He is the giver, whose giving flows from the source of pure goodness in his heart, and whose receiving immediately fills his heart with gratitude in payment for whatever he receives. So even when I receive, I give through gratitude. And here it's also worth mentioning, and this is particularly true for people who are in the helping professions, it is important for givers to receive, and we all know this, because if people only give and do not receive, the well runs dry. It becomes impossible for me to give after a while, because I have nothing, I've not received enough in order to process that and give to others. So even if I am a giver, I need to keep in mind that I need to be a receiver as well. You move it up a little bit, Tani? Whoops. Yeah. So he concludes, the perfected world is one where every person, without exception, gives to and benefits others, and whose heart overflows with gratitude for what he receives from others. A human society such as this is the perfect and happy society, overflowing with peace and love, the society in which Hashem delights. Now, before I open it up for questions, I want to say something. I really alluded to that before, but I want to say it in a more straightforward way, which is Musar sets the bar very high. I think that all of us would probably say we are essentially generous beings. Generally speaking, in our life, we help other people, we do good things for other people, we're givers and we're not takers. The idea of Musar is to say that may be generally true, but if I look inside myself, I need to ask myself, can I do more? How can I be more of a giver? If I really put this as being central to my life, and I really believe, as Rabbi Dessler does, that this is the most important value of life, to be giving to others, then I'm going to take a more careful look at how I live my life and probably become more of a giver. That doesn't mean I'm not an evil person or a taker necessarily if I don't engage in this process. But through engaging in this process, I become a better person than I was before. That at least is Rabbi Dessler's argument. So I'm saying that in part is I don't want anybody to feel offended. Feel like, well, I'm a generous person. Well, what is Rabbi Dessler telling me? He's not saying that you're not or I'm not. He's saying if we engage in this kind of spiritual discipline, we can be more giving than we are now. Okay, so let's see if there are any questions.
So I actually haven't had questions coming yet, but we can give it a minute just to see if anyone wants to chat me a question for Rabbi Diamond.
Okay.
Do you want, do you want to keep going perhaps, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So now let's go back to the sources. And we're up to part 2. And this, for me, is a very, very interesting discussion. And this deals with the roots of love. What is the nature of love? And what is the relationship between generosity and love? So he begins by saying, we see that love and giving always come together. Is the giving a consequence of the love? Or perhaps the reverse is true. Is the love a result of the giving? I don't know. In our society, well, I'm sure there are different answers by different people, and we'll see that. Well, let's leave it. We'll come to a discussion of this by a contemporary marriage counselor that I think is relevant to this discussion. So Rabbi Dessler says, we usually think that it is love which causes giving, because we observe that a person showers gifts and favors, I'm sorry, I misread that. A person showers gifts and favors on the one loves. But there is another side to the argument. Giving may bring about love for the same reason that a person loves what he himself has created or nurtured. He recognizes in it a part of himself. Whether it is a child he has brought into the world, an animal he has reared, a plant he has tended, or even a thing that he has made or a house that he has built. Person is bound in love to the work of his hands, for in it he finds himself. So in other words, with inanimate things and with people, when I give to them, I have invested part of myself in them, and therefore I feel an identification with them, and I feel a closeness to them, and that can be, to a greater or lesser extent, a form of love. We can all think about the ways in which it might be true in our own lives. I'll give an example of the way in which I think it's true in my life. I'm a teacher. I put a lot of effort into preparing teaching and the teaching itself. And so I'm investing a lot in the students. And for myself, I think it's fair to say, obviously, I want to feel good and I want people to feel that I'm doing a good job. And as I always say to my students, if you have something good to say about me, don't be shy. I'm happy to hear it. But I think it's fair to say that primarily I feel a obligation and an interest in giving my students as much as I can. And in doing that, I feel closer to them. I feel, let's call it a love for them. And that love springs in part from the fact that I have given to them. And that forms a kind of connection between us. Maybe at this point, we'll bring in Gary Chapman. So Gary Chapman is a marriage counselor, and he's written a number of books, one called The 5 Love Languages. And what he argues in that book, just a second, I need to, yeah. What he argues in this book is that there are 2 stages in a relationship. The first stage is we are in love. There is an intoxication a feeling that we can't be apart from the person we love. He says that lasts for a number of years, maybe for some people lasts a lifetime, but for most people, that morphs into something else. It morphs into we love the other person, but the intoxication disappears. And frankly, sometimes some of the things that we found endearing when we first met that person become less endearing as time goes on. So how do we nurture that love after the period of passion and intoxication? By the way, passion is great. More you have, great. I'm not discouraging it, just saying. So Chapman says that he's identified 5 love languages: words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, and physical touch. He says that based on his studies, these are 5 ways in which love can be expressed. And what he's found in his work is that people often don't understand the language of their spouse. So they think that they're expressing love to the other person, but actually, as far as the other person is concerned, they're not feeling the love because they're not getting love in the form of the language that is meaningful to them. So let's imagine someone who works very hard. He's hardly home. And his wife feels, or husband feels, very unloved. And these 2 people come to Gary Chapman, and the wife says, let's say, let's leave gender out of it. One of the spouses says, I don't feel loved because my spouse is out of the house all the time. And the spouse says, I don't understand. The reason I'm out of the house all the time is because I'm working to provide for us. That's how I'm showing my love for you. And this is the acts of service model of love. So I'm serving you. I'm doing all of this so we have what we need. The problem is, for this person, for the spouse, that's not the language of love for this person. And so for the relationship to work, both parties need to know what is the love language of the other party. And Chapman's point is that if I express that love to the other person in the language that the other person understands, first of all, the other person will feel loved, but I will also feel more connected to that person because I will be getting love back from the other person. So this fits into this general point in the sense that love in a marriage or any other relationship is actually sparked in part by giving. If you come home and you say to someone, how was your day? If a person prepares dinner for you and you say, thank you for the dinner, besides these being acts of gratitude and concern, they make one feel more connected to the other person to whom I'm saying that. So even if I'm not feeling that loving when I walk into the house, as I say those things, I begin to feel more loving. At least that's my experience, and I think that's a lot of people's experience. Now, at the very end of this paragraph, he says something. Let's see, this is 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the end. It says, I've been shown a source in the sayings of our rabbis, which may indicate that they held the opinion which we have just put forward, that love flows in the direction of giving. They say in the tractate Derech Eretz Zuta, if you want to keep close to the love of your friend, make it your concern to seek that person's welfare. So the connection that I have with another person is increased by the fact that I do things for that other person. I try to ask myself, what does that person need? And in that way, I feel more connected to that other person. I want to give a somewhat complicated example, but sometimes we have people in our lives and we don't know what to say to them. They're ill, they've lost someone in their lives, and we don't know what to say, what to do. We feel inadequate. And sometimes the way that we deal with that is by staying away, by not calling, by not visiting. And I think Rabbi Dessler's message is, that's understandable. But if I love that other person, then I will get past that anxiety and that fear and be present for the other person. Because let's face it, in most of those cases, that's really all we can offer, and that's really all that the other person wants. And when we're present for that other person, we remind ourselves of how much we care about the other person. I just this morning visited a friend of mine who had a stroke and in the hospital, and things don't look very good, and he's not communicative. And I went there and I held his hand. Did he hear me? Did he not hear me? I have no idea. But I expressed my love for that person, and I expressed it, and I felt connected by going there, by being present for that person. Okay. Let's move on to the next. Okay. So here, Rabbi Dessler talks about loving the stranger. He says, people tend to restrict their giving and their love to a narrow circle of relatives and friends. Now, to some extent, that's inevitable. I can't, expand and expend my love at the same level of intensity to everyone in the world. That's not possible. However, aside from that circle of relatives and friends, they look on everyone else as strangers and deal with them in ways dominated by the power of taking. In other words, my relationship to these people is transactional. So envy, exploitation, grasping, and greed rule the day. If one were only to reflect that a person comes to love the one to whom one gives, one would realize that the only reason the other person seems a stranger to him is because he has not yet given to him. He has not yet taken the trouble to show him friendly concern. Excuse me one second, sorry. If I give to someone, I feel close to him. I have a share in his being. It follows that if I were to start bestowing good upon everyone I come into contact with, I would soon feel that they were all my relatives, all my loved ones. I now have a share in them all. My being has extended into all of them. Now, of course, again, I'm really sorry. Now, of course, it usually is a small gesture. But we know, for example, that if we smile at someone, that generally makes the other person feel good. It's a small gesture, but in giving to that person, giving that smile, that person feels better. But also, in smiling at that person, I am saying, I don't see you as a stranger. I don't see you as a threat. I don't see you as something apart. I see you as someone to whom I would like to give. What I have to give you right now is my smile. To somebody else, I might give directions. somebody else, I might help them carry their packages. But every time I do that, Rabbi Dessler would argue, I become more and more connected to people around me, even people that I don't know. So in doing this, I'm expanding the circle of giving. And if we go back to what Rabbi Dessler said earlier, this, in a very small way, takes us on the path towards a perfected world. And we're a little far from that, especially these days. I think we feel that way, but that's the goal. Okay. Let's look at the last paragraph. Someone who has been granted the merit to reach the sublime level can understand the command, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," in its literal sense, as yourself, without distinction, as yourself, in actual fact. By giving to that person of yourself, you will find in your soul that you and that person are one. So here, Rabbi Dessler is adding something, namely that by giving to others, we not only more fully realize who we're supposed to be as givers, we not only feel that this person is not a stranger, but we feel connected to that person. And the greater extent that we feel connection with people, the greater we are all connected. I mean, that was a tautology, I guess, but the goal is this sense of connection. Okay, finally, let's look at part 3, which is on page 4. I call this cultivating radical empathy. This is my phrase, and I borrow it from Abraham Joshua Heschel spoke of radical amazement in relationship to God. That what we want to achieve is a sense of amazement, being amazed by the world in which we live, and for Heschel, that ultimately leads us to God. And in this phrase, what I want to suggest is that radical empathy, really opening ourselves to imagining who the other person is, what things are like for them, allows us to have this intense connection. So what Rabbi Dessler talks about here is, he's just said in the previous section that it is important to connect with others and not to see them as strangers. But he realizes this is easier said than done. So in this section, he suggests to us how we might cultivate this habit of giving, even to people who we don't know. He says, a wonderful idea suggests itself here for helping oneself to acquire the quality of giving. Hashem has implanted a spark of the artist in each of us, each according to one's ability. Whenever we use our imagination to picture something to ourselves, this arouses our emotions and makes its impression on us. Before we arrive at the ultimate goal of joy and ecstatic attachment to God and love, which forms the basis of true giving, as we have seen, we can at least try to picture to ourselves our neighbor's worry and distress in all their details and nuances. The sympathy and compassion thus engendered may move us to actions of loving kindness. So what's important here is, I don't necessarily know you. You are a stranger. But in this act of radical empathy, I humanize this other person, and I imagine to myself that this person must have similar joys and fears and successes and failures just as I do. So this person is a person just like me. And in this act of imagination, He says, the sympathy and compassion thus engendered may move us to actions of loving kindness. Similarly, he says, we can picture his relief and happiness at obtaining what he so sorely needs. So we're imagining two things. We're imagining the person in need, and we're imagining how grateful a person is when those needs are met. And it doesn't take all that much imagination because we ourselves have the same experience in life. The knowledge that it is in our power to cause our friend all this happiness must surely make giving easier for us. And here I want to emphasize a word that Rabbi Dessler uses, and that is the word power, which is to say that rather than thinking that giving to others is somehow a diminishment, something that we've mentioned before, and sometimes something that people feel, giving to others is an expression of power. It's part of the power that we have as human beings. And so we should see giving as augmenting ourselves, exercising our power, being greater than we were before we engaged in that act of giving. Okay. But for the picture to work, we must already have a measure of love for our neighbor. It's going to be hard to exercise this act of imagination if we have no concern, if we're totally indifferent to our neighbor. So he says now, if none of this works, we don't feel any particular love towards individuals, and we seem not to be able to exercise the power of imagination. He says, if this is insufficient, we can make use of service from fear, not an expression that I like. I would prefer service from reverence. Our reverence towards God requires us to be godly. We can feel it to be our duty to be a giver, and our imagination can tell us how a giver ought to feel. Also, we must try to do as many acts of loving kindness as possible and trust that the repeated actions will influence the quality of giving deep within our hearts. And here Rabbi Dessler is saying two things that I think are extremely important. The first is sometimes the only way to motivate ourselves to action is duty. And of course, Judaism is a very duty-based religion. And so I should not say to myself, excuse me, I don't really feel loving towards whoever it is. And therefore, I can't really act in their behalf. If I have a sense of duty, then what this teaches me is the action comes first, and then hopefully later the emotion will come. Sometimes when I perform a wedding, I talk about the fact that the ketubah is read under the chuppah. So I don't know how many people here are familiar with the actual contents of the chuppah, but I always say, if it's a traditional chuppah, it's a good thing that it's read in the original Aramaic, so nobody actually knows what it means. Because if you actually know what it means, it says, this woman is bringing bed sheets and dowry into the wedding, and he's promising a certain amount of money. It's all about money. It's all about obligations. And what I suggest is the following, that hopefully our relationships with others, and certainly with the spouse, is based on love and free will giving. But speaking for myself, there are days that I don't feel that loving, for whatever reason. Fight with somebody, fight with your spouse, whatever. And so a person might say, well, I can't really be giving to you today because I'm not really feeling the love. I don't really feel a connection with you today. So a duty-based system says it doesn't work that way. You give because you're obligated to give. And the hope is, and the expectation is, that once I give, even if it's out of duty, I help repair the relationship between me and that other person. And I should say here, as is true of everything I've said, it doesn't always work this way. It's not a surefire formula. But I think these ideas are very, very important. And finally, the second idea that Rabbi Dessler expresses here, which I think is very important, is we should try to do as many acts of loving kindness as possible. Right? Judaism is a behaviorally based religion. And that means that we believe that to a large extent, the way we shape our character is through the acts that we do. And so if we want to become a certain kind of person, then the best way to do that is to identify acts that will likely shape me into that kind of person. I have a friend who was not particularly observant, but became very interested in Judaism. And he asked me once, how can I be more involved? How can I be a better Jew? And my answer was, do Jewish things. You don't have to study philosophy. You don't even have to study at this point. Do Jewish things. Involve yourself in the acts, the daily acts of what it means to be a Jew. And that itself will shape who you are. So this is not a 5-cent tour, I don't know, 25-cent tour of Rabbi Dessler's views on giving, why it's important, how it can be accomplished. And I hope that this is useful to you. And we have a few minutes left if there are questions.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Diamond. I did get a couple of questions.
Okay.
So one question, does Rabbi Dessler suggest a way if to choose among recipients when we see more needs around us than we can meet?
Yeah, so I mean, now we're getting into the details, and obviously these details are important. And actually, this is an area where this is part of what I would call the genius of halakha. Part of the genius of halakha is halakha knows very well that if I have the choice between doing something good and doing something bad, we know what the Torah's answer is going to be. Do good. V'acharta v'chayim. Well, what's much more complicated in life is when we have two goods before us. And how do we decide what to do? And the genius of halakha is that it is not afraid to look into those cases and to make a decision, offer us guidelines into who to give to first. So I'm not going to get into that question of priorities, except to say that Jewish sources deal with such questions. And if one is interested, for example, if you look in the laws of tzedakah, you will find that there are extensive discussions of what happens if I have numerous people before me. How do I allocate my resources? So halakha understands that this is a problem. But I think Rabbi Dessler would say, I mean, putting words in his mouth, but I think Rabbi Dessler would say, that's a very important question. First thing is, be a giver. If you are a giver, then you will move on to the sort of small print.
Thank you. I had one more question.
Yeah.
I'm going to read the comment. In my work as a pastoral counselor, I see many people whose trauma causes a fear of opening up and turns them into takers. One of the first signs of their recovery is when they start expressing their gratitude and begin their transition into givers. Which spiritual tools could be useful to help them get through this transition from a taking into a giving mode?
Well, I'm not a pastoral counselor, so I don't want to practice without a license. I think what's most important for me and for many people is to choose to see this world as a loving place. things happen to us which make us feel that it's not. I mean, again, looking around now, we can cite a lot of evidence for saying this world is, red in tooth and claw, sort of a Hobbesian kind of world. But I think that we have to, or we can believe that there also is good in the world. And perhaps most importantly, based on what we've just read, we have to believe that we can be the agents of good, that by reaching out to others, though it may be difficult, that actually will bring more good into the world. I once read a autobiography of a Holocaust survivor. He said at the very end, I could have chosen anger or love, and I chose love. We do have choices in life as to what kind of world we want and what kind of world we want to create. And there are always reasons to despair and to turn inwards. And I don't mean, people are traumatized. I'm not making judgments about that. And I know how difficult what this person is describing can be. But I do think at the end of the day, we have to have a sense of our own agency. And we have to have a sense that we can choose to be loving and giving. And that if we do that, it does make a difference in however small a way. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. And just one more question. I'm curious, sort of like, these are really, kind of like profound, values and goals. And I'm wondering, for going forward, does Rabbi Dessler, or are there other places that you recommend where it's sort of broken down into more very specific, like tangible steps that like to take and guide, in terms of how to actually put these values into place?
Well, I would argue that he's already offered us some very tangible steps. He said, show gratitude to God, show gratitude to those who give to you, make sure that you give to those who are close to you. And here I'm filling in a little bit with Chapman, but make sure you know what constitutes giving for those people. What is it that they want to receive from you? Because if what you're giving to them is not what they want to receive, it's not going to end very well. So this is also an important skill. And reach out to people around you and give to them as much as you can in however modest a way. Honestly, to me, it really isn't rocket science. I think the basics are all here. And so just based on what we've read today, I think we have certainly a good starting point for becoming givers and becoming more of the person God intended us to be through giving and through gratitude. Those are the foundation stones for Rabbi Dessler.
Thank you for offering that summary. It was very helpful too. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Diamond. Again, thank you so much to everyone for participating. And I'm going to throw into the chat one more time. I mentioned at the beginning of the session, our JTS's full webinar series. I'm going to put a link here as well. And thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I hope everyone has a good day.
Yes. Bye-bye.